The following program was produced by an independent community producer. The opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect those of the QA-TV staff or board of directors. QA-TV, in compliance with FCC regulations, is prohibited from exercising control over the content of independent, member-produced public access programming.
Turn out the light. Believe. This is Greater Boston Paranormal.
Do you feel it? It went through like a path, like a wave. Are you still here with us? What are your intentions?
All this time, I still love the opening.
I agree. It is the best.
So, welcome to this edition of Greater Boston Paranormal TV. I'm Don DiCristofaro. To my right is the ever-amazing and lovely Amanda Cook.
Hello.
Those of you who are watching us for the first time, we are the Greater Boston Paranormal Associates, and we are a paranormal investigation team who are basically home-based aboard USS Salem in Quincy. We're not going to talk too much about Salem tonight, but we're going to get there at some point, and you're always welcome to visit us aboard Salem. We'll tell you how that can happen a little bit later on. But tonight, we are going to talk about one of my favorite subjects. When we first got into doing this on television, one of the things that we talked about, each of us, as we kind of introduced ourselves, was how we got into what we do, how we got interested in the paranormal. And a big part of my paranormal story, really, is a guy by the name of John Keel, who wrote many, many books. But one of his books was the Mothman Prophecies. At one point, I sent a lot of people in our group copies of the Mothman Prophecies. I would be shocked if any of them had actually read it, but I did send it to them.
I did receive it, to confirm.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you.
I thought it was just me.
Thanks for validating that. So in any event, John Keel was an amazing character who could easily be an episode of his own. But one of the things that really got me going when I read the Mothman Prophecies was his stories about the Men in Black. So tonight, we are going to talk about the Men in Black, who they are and what their role is. Okay? Yeah, and those aren't the guys we're going to talk about. Yeah, thank you very much, Cookie. We're not going to talk about Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones. We're going to talk about what I'm going to continue throughout the evening to call the real Men in Black. And I guess before we start, we should talk about where that comes from. And as I said, Keel wrote a magazine article in...
I'm the Man in Black.
You're something. You're something.
I'm
not sure what. So John Keel wrote a magazine article in 1967 called UFO Agents of Evil, I think it was called. And in it, he coined the term Men in Black. But I think the concept goes back a lot further than that. I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Cook, but I think conceptually the Men in Black first made their appearance after Maury Island in 1947.
For sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Maury Island, for those of you who are the uninitiated, and I won't go into it in too great a depth, but Maury Island was a UFO incident where these two guys, Fred Chrisman and Harold Dahl, their names were, claimed to be harbor patrolmen on Puget Sound, which in reality they absolutely were not. But they were on Puget Sound in a boat, and they claimed to see a UFO hover over the bay and dump some kind of metallic slag onto the beach. And they claimed to go and gather up some of this stuff. And they reached out to a dude by the name of Ken Arnold, who was a fairly well-known magazine editor in the paranormal, the UFO world. And Ken Arnold went to Puget Sound and talked to them, and he got a piece of this metal. And he must have been pretty excited about it, because he reached out to a friend of his who was an Air Force captain, and this Air Force captain got a group of guys together, and they piled into a B-25 and flew from Northern California up to Washington State to see what was going on. So the thrust here is, that very day, Ken Arnold says that two guys in black suits pulled up to the motel where he was staying in a big black car and basically told him they knew a lot more about this incident than he did, and that he would be wise if he would just keep his mouth shut and not tell anybody about it.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun. So what he decided to do was wait it out. He said, well, we'll see what the metal really is, and we'll go from there. Now, due to an unfortunate series of events, the whole concept of the Men in Black was now in the pantheon of the UFO conspiracy people. They loved it. And what ended up not mattering at all was that Crispin and Dahl, 2 days later, admitted that they made the whole thing up.
No.
And even though they did that, the UFO people didn't care. They were happy as clams. They were off. They had their tinfoil hats on, and they were off and running. And to make matters worse, the Air Force captain, who knew that this metal was aluminum, didn't want to embarrass his friend Ken Arnold, so he didn't say anything. And then that B-25 caught fire and crashed on the way back to California, and all those guys were killed.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, you had this mystery metal still. You had the Men in Black who visited Ken Arnold and told him to shut up, and you had this plane crash. So even though the two guys that told the story admitted that it was all a big fake, it was legend by then. And the Men in Black, I think were born.
Love that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, but what I love is there's this dude, Peter. I'm not going to try to pronounce his last name. That's not his last name. I'm not going to try to pronounce his last name. He's a professor at Juilliard. And according to him, Men in Black encounters go back to the Bible. He talks about the book of Abraham and the Men in Black appearing in the book of Abraham. In fact, he says that the reason the Catholic Church developed and still sometimes uses the rites of exorcism were all to get rid of Men in Black type entities.
In the book of Abraham, were they still wearing black suit and tie?
I think they were robes.
Black robes. Got it.
Probably the hats. They
No,
probably still wore black hats because people were, they were into hats.
Sunglasses?
No shades.
'Cause that's the whole thing, I feel
No
like.
shades. So I read this thing, and I thought, well, this guy's he's no crazier than most of these people. But then I did a little bit of digging, and I read one of his source materials talks about a passage from the book of Revelations 11:17 maybe, where there's something about how heaven shouldest destroy those who would destroy the earth. And I thought, okay, but this guy, this professor, he interprets that for those of you who are too foolish to understand what it means. And he explained that what that means is that in 2022, Christ was set to return with an army of aliens aboard UFOs
Awesome.
to destroy the Antichrist, Vladimir Putin, and thwart global warming.
What an insane movie that was.
Well, so when I read that, I thought, well, obviously, first I thought, well, duh. But then after that, I thought, yeah, maybe this guy is crazier than the rest of them. And I kind of wrote him off. But I still like to tell that story because I just like it.
I like that too.
Yeah.
Good story.
So I think, we've talked a little bit about where the whole concept came from. And there are people who would argue, a guy by the name of Gray Barker, who is a writer, writes a lot of paranormal stuff, or did anyway. He was one of Keel's friends, and he would probably argue that it was him that made up the term, because they argued constantly about who made up what. But I will always yield to Keel. I will always give Keel credit when I can. So we'll say Maury Island was the first time there was really an encounter with the Men in Black, and we'll say that Keel made up the name. We good with that?
I love that. Keel made up the name.
I like it. So there have been a few fairly recent encounters with the Men in Black. And we're going to get into them, not in a whole lot of depth, but we're going to get into them a little bit. The most interesting one, I think, was the Niagara Falls thing. So what happened in Niagara Falls was that there was a guy, he was a manager at a hotel. This is on the American side, who was out having a cigarette at like 2:30 in the morning, and he saw a UFO. I think it was one of those triangle deals, but I'm not going to really get into the sighting so much, other than the fact that he had another almost exactly the same sighting about 2 weeks later. And he goes on vacation in the spring. That was in October. He doesn't report it until February. And that's when he tells basically anybody who will listen, the local newspapers and everybody else, about these two UFO sightings. In May, he goes on vacation. And while he's gone, something interesting happens at the hotel. And we're gonna show you some pictures of those guys, and you're gonna get an opportunity to hear the voicemail that his coworker left for him while he was on vacation. Okay, let's take a look and listen to that now.
Something really weird happened here yesterday when you weren't here, and I wanted to give you a heads up. There were a couple guys looking for you. I mean, it's really hard for me to explain. There were a couple of really strange-looking men that were here. They kind of freaked everybody out, and they were asking all kinds of questions about you after I told them you weren't here. They said the strangest things that I didn't really understand. They were talking about governments and conspiracies, and none of it made any sense to me, but they were really, really scary. I mean, they were scary and weird looking. They had no freaking facial hair, none. They had no eyebrows, no eyelashes, nothing. Their hair looked like they had a wig on, like a bad wig, like it was attached to their hat, like it wasn't even real. And the scariest thing is their eyes were so big, they were so blue that they almost hypnotized me a little bit. These men, they didn't blink. Not once did I see them blink. Anyway, it was really disturbing, so I thought I'd want to let you know before you came back to the hotel and they came back to see you.
What a crazy voicemail that was. I feel like a Men in Black myself.
I thought you might. That was kind of the whole point. So yeah, I mean, those guys never came back, and nothing ever really came of it because this hotel guy shut up. I think he was scared to death.
It seems like that's how a lot of these stories go, that they see them and then it's never spoken about again. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and we'll talk about that a little bit more too. Some of these UFO guys, and I'm very pointedly avoiding the term ufologists. That's what they like.
Is that what they like?
Yeah.
Okay.
and I really struggle with calling somebody a ufologist.
Ufologist.
So I do. I really don't use the term all that often, but that's what they call themselves, and that's what tends to happen though, is that they they make a big splash, and to be completely honest, I think in a lot of cases, all of a sudden nobody's looking at them anymore, so they just shut up.
I think that eventually their memory gets erased, obviously.
Well, I mean, that's what Tommy Lee Jones would tell you. So the next one, it took place in New Orleans, and this was a guy who, it's funny, all the accounts called him Jack Smith, but they always said it in quotation marks. So it's unclear who this dude really was, but they all describe him as a guy who's very well known in UFO circles, which kind of makes you wonder why somebody who's very well known in UFO circles would want his name redacted from a great UFO story.
Well known in UFO circles.
Yeah, but you know what? That makes sense to me, and it should make sense to you too, because there are plenty of people that we know who are well known in paranormal circles, right?
Like you.
Yes, like me. There are plenty of people, and I refer to them as, well, I refer to them as paralebrities, but when I'm talking to other people, I describe them as big fish in our little pond.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, so it's a good way.
So well known in UFO circles is something that makes sense to me.
Me too.
So anyway, he talks about a situation in New Orleans at Bienville Street Station, which is a trolley station down very close to the river. I've been there, and he talks about being approached by two guys in black suits. In this case, they were identical guys. And he talks about how he ran into a lot of problems where he recorded video of them and sent it to a friend of his, a woman, but somehow her phone deleted the video, and he was reluctant to send it to anybody else because everybody, he sent it to somebody else who had problems with it. And so we have a couple of pictures that he supposedly took of these guys, and we're gonna show the audience the pictures, and we're gonna hear from this guy, and he's gonna tell us exactly how the whole thing went down in his words.
Great.
Okay, let's do that now.
Here's a story from New Orleans, Louisiana, about a supposed Men in Black encounter at the Bienville Street trolley station. In 2014, a man well known in UFO circles for his previous encounters with the gray aliens approached the UFO grid with a report of encounters with the Men in Black. In his report, he and his friend, who he only identifies as Jane, told a story about being harassed by the Men in Black in New Orleans, which I think, if you have to be harassed, that is definitely the place to do it. The man, identified by the alias Jack Smith, is now in his 50s and claims that he's been relentlessly stalked his whole life by a pair of the mysterious entities wearing black identical suits, which he surmised was due to his previous encounters. Here's what he says about his experiences.
They let me know that I could be found wherever I was. What was said to me was threatening, and they have caused me to live in fear a lot of the time. I know the truth. My good and close friends know the truth as well. I knew something was wrong immediately. They looked like identical twins. They were slim and much taller than the average person. They were dressed in identical black suits, white shirts, skinny black ties, fedoras, and black sunglasses. They looked just so odd. They were pale, they were stiff, and they moved eerily in unison. They had oblong faces with a thin line for a mouth. The whole vibe was cold and creepy. They were calm, but like a reptile can be calm. Twin lizards in suits. They leaned in simultaneously to communicate with each other. Their mouths opened slightly, but they were not talking. They were communicating something to each other, but not talking.
According to Mr. Smith, the two strange men waited there and stared at him the whole time. But when the streetcar finally arrived, after a 20-minute wait, the two men reportedly turned away and walked over to a shiny black car with foreign license plate, got in the car, and drove away. Jack captured some of the encounter on his cell phone and had later relayed to Jane what he thought they were. Although she was taken aback by his theory, she'd seen it all herself, so there was no denying that these weren't ordinary people. Jack later sent her video footage he'd taken, but somehow Jane's phone deleted it, as well as all the other data on her memory card. The video also supposedly deleted itself off another friend's phone when Jack tried to send it to him. Jack would finally send it to UFO Grid, and about which he explained.
The thought of giving the video to anyone scares the hell out of me, because the last time I tried to share it, bad things happened. The thought of what could possibly happen to me if I did release it, I honestly do fear for my life. The experience is awful. I can't even begin to explain to you how awful it is. The very thought of stirring things up scares the heck out of me. I hope it can help someone that is struggling in silence because of the MIB harassment. Whatever or whoever uses these MIBs to keep us in fear, to control us, is despicable.
Okay, so I mean that's kind of an interesting thing too. Frankly, between you, I, and hopefully somebody else, the guys look more like goofballs than anything else to me. But he said that they were kind of threatening, and you know, we all know people who look like goofballs and in reality can be a little bit on the menacing side.
Twins are very threatening.
Okay, there you go. So that was the next one. Last but not least, we have a guy who was a professor at the University of Pennsylvania. And his story, which we're going to hear him tell in a minute, is that he was in the library. He said another professor had given him a book about UFOs. And he was reading it when this dude appeared out of nowhere and started asking him questions, and at one point got animated to the point that this guy really felt threatened, he said.
What do you mean animated?
Well, he got very excited when I think this professor told him that he wasn't really sure he was even interested in UFOs, and this guy just flipped out that it was such an important subject that this guy could not be interested in it. Just boggled his mind. And what's really interesting is kind of the end of his story, because it almost seems as though reality is bent a little bit as far as what happens to this guy. So let's take a listen to what this guy has to say as well, and we can talk about that.
Sounds good.
All right.
This takes place in 1980. I was at the library at the University of Pennsylvania reading a UFO book suggested by another professor who had thought I'd be interested. Then, in the corner of my eye, I noticed a black pants leg and a black shoe, really scuffed. I looked up, and standing in front of me was a very gaunt, very pale man. He was about 6'1", weighed about 140, and wore a black suit, black shoes, black string tie, and a bright white shirt. His suit was loose, and it looked as though he'd been sleeping in it for about 3 or 4 days. He sat down like he dropped from the ceiling, all in one movement, and folded his hands on top of a stack of books in front of me. Then he asked what I was doing. When I told him I was reading about flying saucers, he asked, "Have you seen a flying saucer?" And I told him I hadn't. "Do you believe in the reality of flying saucers?" I told him I didn't know much about them. I wasn't even sure I was very interested in the phenomena. All of a sudden, he became very animated and pretty much screamed, "Flying saucers are the most important fact of the century, and you are not interested?" I was definitely startled, but I was trying to calm him down when he jumped up, once again, all in a single movement, put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Go well on your purpose," and walked away. It took me about 10 seconds or so, because I was absolutely overwhelmed with fear. I just had a sense that this man was out of the ordinary, that the idea frightened me. I got up, walked around the stacks toward where the reference librarians usually are, but they weren't there. In fact, there was nobody else in the library. I was scared. I went back to the table where I'd been reading to kind of get myself together. It took me about an hour. Then I got up and everything was back to normal. The people were all as though they'd been there all along.
Okay, so that was kind of interesting, if nothing else, because it's kind of weird the way it ends.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird that he lost that amount of time and then everything was back to normal after.
Yeah. So I thought that was kind of creepy. And I mean, again, it's one guy, so who the heck is to say? But it is something, and you kind of, I always wonder. This guy's not a UFO guy. He's a professor at Pennsylvania is a pretty prestigious university. You kind of wonder why a guy like this, who in my thinking has something to lose, really, would tell a story like this if it didn't happen, or if something didn't happen.
Yeah, that's true.
You know what I mean?
It's interesting.
Unless everybody thought he was a nutcake already. I don't know.
What was he a professor of?
That's a good question. I'm not really sure.
Aliens?
And that's why. That's why you asked me.
No.
So those are the three recent encounters that we want to talk about. And here's where we're going to go into what I think is really the most interesting aspect of this whole thing, and that is WikiLeaks.
WikiLeaks.
You must be into that, right?
I love the internet.
And the internet loves you, from what I've seen, but we won't get into that now either. So when that whole, between WikiLeaks, Edward Snowden, Julian Assange, or when all that big data dump came down, which I want to say was 2013.
That long ago?
Yeah, imagine that.
Oh.
A lot of people went nuts, and I got to admit that that I dug into it to look at a number of different things. I'm definitely not going to tell you what they all were, but UFOs was one of them. Marilyn Monroe was one of them. There were a few others.
There were some good ones.
There were a few others that I was interested in, but we're going to focus on the UFO one.
Wait a second. I didn't look at that.
So when all this happened, like I said, the UFO people went nuts because they said, here it is. All of the government's deep, dark secrets, all of the things they've been hiding in the cellar about UFOs are all going to be made clear to us, and we're going to know the truth.
Here it is.
And there was nothing there. What I was able to find, and I'm not going to get into it, it's pretty easy to find all the WikiLeaks stuff, so I won't get into it all, but what I found were three pictures that are clearly hoaxes.
This is your own personal research?
No, yeah.
Oh, cool.
Everybody who's ever seen these, everybody who's ever seen these pictures knows that they're hoaxes. And
it's like a pancake in the air?
Well, one's a hubcap. I want to say one is a bunch of balloons. And I think one of them's a bird. And I can see where, at first glance, you would say, wow, what the heck is that? But they're very well known. In any event, they're very well known.
Birds are actually government robots, so.
Well, you're giving away the next episode.
Sorry.
So anyway, all these people were all excited, and and when they saw those pictures, even though they were all hoax, they were all like, yes, there it is. The government's been hiding all this stuff. When the reality is, in my opinion, looking at all that stuff and from all the reading I did, it looked to me like behind all the smoke, there was just more smoke. You know what I mean? It didn't look like there was a fire. But there was something really interesting to me. Julian Assange at one point said this, and I'm paraphrasing, but he definitely said, a lot of weirdos write to us about UFOs. He definitely said that.
No.
He did. He said, well, I can tell you. He said, a lot of weirdos write to us about UFOs, but the reality is the vast majority of UFO material we found was more about the UFO cults than the crafts themselves. Now, I read that and I thought, holy moly, these UFO people were so excited about finding something that they missed the punchline.
True.
Hello, ufologists. The government is watching you. That's the deep, dark secret.
So everyone that reported a UFO or wrote in about a UFO was all put in a big group.
Yeah, and that's who the government was watching.
These are the people.
And we'll get to it in a few minutes, but for good reason. So enter a guy by the name of Mark Pilkington. And he's a documentarian. Does that sound right?
No.
He makes documentaries. If that wasn't right, then tell me what is.
Documentarist.
That's definitely not right.
Better.
He makes documentaries in any event. And he set out to make a documentary, and I don't know what the original title was, but it ended up being called Mirage Men. And you can watch it. It's on Amazon Prime.
Ooh.
And you can watch it. And it's amazing. And what this guy started out to do was to make a documentary about, not about UFOs themselves, but about the methods that the government was using to spread disinformation and to hide all of these secrets about aliens and extraterrestrials and UFOs and stuff. That was his goal. But the mistake he made, and the mistake conspiracy theorists never make, is that he talked to people on both sides. So not only did he talk to a lot of UFO people, but he talked to a lot of retired Air Force intelligence officers.
As he should.
He talked to some people who were military disinformation specialists. And at the end of the day, what he discovered was far more amazing than the government hiding UFO secrets. The truth is, the government wasn't hiding these stories. They were perpetuating them.
I feel like they definitely do that.
Well, I don't think there's any question about it now. And there are dozens of examples of the government doing this. Dozens and dozens. We're going to focus on a guy by the name of Paul Benowitz. He was a very well-to-do guy. He was he owned an electronics distributorship, and he was a pilot. He had a small plane, and he owned a ranch.
Wow.
And he started seeing lights in the sky, and they were crazy. And he started filming these lights, and he was seeing them while he was up in his plane. He said he was buzzed at one point by something.
He was buzzed?
Well, not your kind of buzzed. When he was in his plane, something. Yeah.
I really thought you meant that.
Yes,
he was
I know.
In his plane,
I'm sure you did. So he told all these stories, and eventually, being a good patriot, he called the Air Force. And he said, guys, you should see all this stuff I'm seeing. Well, the Air Force, they knew two things right off the bat. One was that what this guy was seeing was a whole bunch of secret stuff going on at Kirtland Air Force Base.
Oh, man.
And the other thing they knew was they knew an opportunity when they saw one.
What do you mean?
What I mean is this. Enter one Richard Doty, Man in Black. This is Richard Doty.
That
Now,
guy is not in
Yeah,
black.
this guy looks about as much like a man in black as my mother does.
He does. He
Right?
does. He's very librarian.
Yeah, right. So Richard Doty, in reality, is a retired Air Force Special Operations and Intelligence officer.
Oh, wow. He's got a title.
And what he and others like him have been doing for years was infiltrating these UFO groups. And they've been doing it the same way Richard Doty introduced himself to his new friend Paul Benowitz.
Wow. What was his goal in doing this?
He went to I'll tell you, he went to Benowitz and he said, hey, he introduced himself. Guess what name he used?
Jack Smith.
Close. Richard Doty.
Oh.
He said, my name is Richard Doty. I am a retired Air Force Special Investigations and Intelligence officer. And I'm sick and tired of hiding all this secret stuff down in the cellar. Sick of it.
He didn't say that.
It's time for the American people to know all this stuff. And what you're seeing is just the tip of the iceberg, so I'm going to help you. Well, next thing you know, Benowitz is seeing and hearing all kinds of stuff. And his new friend Doty is helping him along the way. At one point, Benowitz reported that he started hearing all this crazy stuff on his shortwave radio that he was fairly sure were alien communications. And his friend Doty was able to provide him the software he needed to decrypt it.
What are you saying? Doty
I'm
is
saying it was really easy because Doty's the one that was sending him the transmissions in the first place.
Is Doty an alien?
No.
He's got the
Doty's exactly
inside
who he said he is.
info.
Yeah. At one point, Benowitz said that when he was flying over his ranch, he was seeing these shiny things, and he was fairly sure that there was UFO wreckage on his ranch. And as soon as he told Doty that, well, next thing you know, wreckage everywhere, wreckage. He was finding stuff all over the place because Doty was helping him. And as it turns out, the whole deal here was that the last thing the Air Force wanted was for Benowitz to know what he was really seeing, which was a whole bunch of secret stuff at Kirtland Air Force Base.
He's like, I don't know what I'm seeing over here, but
So they
I
were
think
much
it's
happier.
aliens.
They were much happier that he thought he was seeing UFOs. Right?
But what if he was?
Well, maybe he was, but they didn't care. So
Perfect.
So here's the thing. So Doty does this to Benowitz. The sad part of the story is that this all started in 1979. It went on for almost 10 years. Finally, it got to be 1988, and Benowitz started telling everybody that a whole-scale invasion was coming. And that was too much for Doty, the Air Force, and apparently for Benowitz's family, because Benowitz's family had him committed at that point.
Oh, no.
He's not the only one who was committed because of all this stuff.
Oh, geez. I
Yeah.
feel like I'm on my way there.
Yeah, so Doty did this stuff all over the place, and his stories go far afield of just UFOs. You know, what I should have said when we first got started was that the problem with any UFO related story subject. And the reason why, back when we were doing our podcast, we never got to do a UFO story or episode, was that when you start talking about UFOs, you can't take one step in either direction without falling down a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They're everywhere.
Yeah, that's true.
And this is no exception. Doty at one point denied, but later turned out to be the sole architect of something called Project Serpo, or the Majestic 12, which is basically Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Really?
It's where the U.S. government supposedly sent 12 Air Force officers to another galaxy with the aliens, and how some of them chose to stay, some of them accidentally died there, some of them came back. It's a very intricate story, and again, we won't get into it now because it's a whole episode of its own. But it turned out Doty was the one who made the whole damn thing up.
This guy has a big imagination.
Well, he probably gets paid pretty well to do it, I would think.
Think so?
So anyway, this is kind of the guiding thing behind the Men in Black to me, is that for all their craziness, at the end of the day, the UFO people, once again, I'm not going to call them ufologists, whether they like it or not.
Ufologists.
Yeah, maybe we'll think of our own. I have several words.
Spell that.
So yeah, the two O's in the middle, they always throw me off. But it turns out that to some extent, they were right. In my opinion, in some version, the Men in Black exist.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the Men in Black stems from people's beliefs about aliens and wanting them to be real so bad, and then needing some sort of backup, being like, also the government's in on this, or also the aliens are in on this. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
they come out and they're like, well, this guy came to my house and told me I'm learning too much about it, So it's like another backbone for UFO people to, I guess, stand on. But honestly, I believe them. So I'm on both sides of the fence. I think Men in Black are real. But do you think Men in Black are aliens, or do you think that they're the FBI?
Well, that's a good question. And to go back to my friend Keel, John Keel, he ran the whole spectrum. Initially, Men in Black were they were government agents who were trying to shut everybody up. And then, if you had read Mothman Prophecies, you would know
I did.
that in some of the encounters he talks about in Mothman Prophecies, the Men in Black are clearly aliens. Like he talks about one where the guy's pants were too short, and he apparently had some kind of green wire running down his leg that was kind of like embedded in his leg.
Like a vein?
I suppose. And that at some point he asked for a glass. He looked at his watch, and he asked for a glass of water, and took a huge pill. And Keel's thinking was that the only comparison I can draw, and Keel obviously didn't have this comparison, but did you ever see what's the Bruce Willis movie with Mila Jovovich? Where she's okay, so anyway.
The Shape of Water.
That's definitely not it. In this movie.
The one where she's the girl. Never mind. I'm going to think of it.
Trust me, she's the girl.
I'm going to think of it.
Fifth Element.
Fifth Element. Yes.
In the Fifth Element, did you see it?
Yes.
In the same sense that you read the Mothman Prophecies, or did you really see it?
I saw it a while ago.
Okay, so the bad dude aliens in the fifth dimension, the Fifth Element, at one point they turn themselves into humans, but it's really hard for them. Remember, they keep like bursting out.
Yeah, like boop, boop.
And that's what Keel felt about this guy. was that it was difficult to stay looking like a human. And like a certain period of time in, he had to take this pill to help him keep his human persona. That was kind of his deal.
I think it's funny that people just assume that like the Men in Black are just this overarching people though, because for me, like there are different species of aliens, like there are people. You know what I mean? Like
yeah.
I think like the Men in Black probably aren't alien associated because why, like anytime there's an alien encounter or somebody learns too much about aliens, like wouldn't they only get offended if it was their kind? You know what I mean?
Well,
Like,
sure. And I'm gonna keep doing this. If you'd read the Mothman prophecies, you would know, because in one of Keel's stories, one of the main characters in the Mothman prophecies is a guy whose name I can't remember off the top of my head, but he's a contactee who has a lot of contact with one particular alien. The alien calls himself Indrid Cold. And
that's a good name.
And Cold is a good guy, and he talks to Woody Dernberger is the guy's name, and Indrid Cold appears to Woody a number of times, and then one night Woody Dernberger is driving, and a UFO blocks the road in front of him, which is how he meets Cold in the first place. But this isn't Indrid Cold. This is somebody else who robs him.
Oh no!
Including taking his shoes and socks.
Oh no!
And Woody's all confused now.
He's like, Cold, why'd you do me like this, man?
But what happens is, the next night, he's stopped by Indrid Cold, who asks him what happened the night before.
What do you mean
and
stops by?
Stops him the same way as he's driving.
Oh,
and says, what happened last night? And when Derenberger explains it to him, he says, I'll take care of that. And 2 days later, he goes out of his house, and on his porch are his freshly shined shoes, his washed socks, and his wallet and watch.
You're lying. That's crazy.
This is all pretty well documented. Woody Derenberger wrote a book. He was all over television at the time.
That's awesome.
But in any event, that's exactly what you're talking about, right? Where Woody Derenberger, Indrid Cold basically was like, yeah, I hate those guys.
Oh my goodness.
But I'll take care of them.
It reminds me of when we were interviewing with Mike Stevens, and if you haven't seen that episode, definitely check it out. But he was always saying how like a specific alien or a specific group of them has been following his family along their like lifeline.
Yep.
And like, his experience is much more negative, but it makes you think like, are there positive aliens? Are there negative aliens? Are the Men in Black aliens? Like, you just don't know. I don't know.
Well,
It's interesting.
Well, here is where our discussion of the Men in Black, and that's a great segue, because here is where our discussion of the Men in Black comes to a crossroads. And it's partly wrapped up in what I said earlier about the rabbit hole thing, where you can't talk about UFOs or extraterrestrials without falling down a rabbit hole, because they're everywhere. But when we finally do getting around to talking about aliens in earnest, I am going to expose myself as a complete nut job when I tell you what my theory on the whole thing is.
Oh man, I'm looking forward to that.
But for now, I'm going to say that the Men in Black are real. That unlike Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones, they're not covering up the aliens. They're actually making up the aliens. That Richard Doty is the epitome of the Men in Black. He is not an alien.
The librarian guy.
Yep.
Okay.
He works for the government, and he is doing his job. He is leading the UFO people astray, feeding them disinformation, to keep them off chasing false flags. And there are several byproducts to this. One is that the Air Force knows who is really watching stuff that they don't want them to watch. Because, some of these guys, like Benowitz, they're freezing their butts off on hillsides in the middle of the night, watching lights, telling everybody they're watching all these UFOs when really they're watching stealth fighters. So the Air Force now knows who exactly is watching the stealth fighters and how much are they seeing and at what point is it going to be a problem.
Because otherwise you would see the Men in Black much more often
Sure.
because people would be actually claiming to see them and be giving out information that the Men in Black didn't want people to know. So that's why I think they're...
You're absolutely right. The other byproduct to this too, and amazingly, I'm just thinking of this as we're talking. I bet you the government is really happy that while all this stuff is going on, if foreign governments are watching and they think that the U.S. government has agents who are talking about what the U.S. government is doing with UFOs and stuff, they're probably thinking, that's awesome too.
Wow, yeah, we need some of those.
Yeah, that's awesome too.
Yeah, for sure.
Because now, whatever countries might be watching, they're all confused about what's going on.
I mean, that's a good point. Have the Men in Black ever showed up in another place besides the United States?
There are encounters in the United Kingdom for sure. No question about it. No question about it. In fact, I should have included one of those, but I was so focused on Doty and what's going on here that I didn't go there, but I could have.
Yeah,
So
that's interesting.
so there are definitely things in the United Kingdom as well. So anyway, that's I think that the UFO people are right. I think the men in Black most definitely are wearing their black suits and driving around in big black cars and talking to UFO people. And I won't go into it in any depth, but I'll tell you this. Since I'm halfway down that road already, I'll say this. I believe that the United States government not only believes in the existence of UFOs and extraterrestrials, but since the very late 40s or early 50s, has been communicating and working with extraterrestrials.
I agree.
In a number of areas.
I agree. And did you hear about that thing recently? Not to get off track too much, but there's like an article that came out that was saying like in the next year or so or soon they're gonna like publicize this like alien encounter where like they come down from the sky and like everyone's like whoa and then they meet them and they end up being nice and they're like hey what's up America love you.
You know what
and then they leave and so they're gonna fake that so that people are like comfortable with aliens in a way that like they shouldn't be. You know what I mean?
Well, you know what, now we've got to get into it.
Like, did you hear that though? That they're gonna do
No,
that?
I didn't. But
So I think they're like planning with the aliens, like, okay, like how can we like bring this out to the general public so that they don't like freak out?
you should write this down because I don't think I've ever said this before. Cookie, you're right.
Yes!
So I think you're absolutely right. And
I'm right.
And here's where we're going to close. In 1950, the United States government approached a young, unknown movie producer and said, we want you to make a movie. We're going to pay for the movie, and we're going to pay you to make it. We want you to make a movie that shows America that aliens can be good guys. You got to understand that all the movies to that point had all been Earth versus the flying saucers, right?
Yeah.
War of the Worlds. So they went to a guy by the name of Darryl Zanuck, who is no longer young and unknown, but who is rich far beyond any of our dreams, and who has made some of the greatest movies of all time. And they said, we want you to make this movie. And he said no. So they said, what else do you want? We'll do you some other favors. And since I wasn't ready to get into this, the guy's name escapes me, but he said, one of my best friends is blacklisted, and I want you to clear his name. So sure enough, in 1952, Darryl Zanuck produced The Day the Earth Stood Still, about a handsome, well-spoken, friendly alien who's here to save us all.
Love that.
And the man who plays the professor in that movie was Darryl Zanuck's best friend, who up to that point had been blacklisted by the government as a communist, and who suddenly, amazingly, was cleared of everything and allowed to star in that movie.
Perfect.
That thread, at some point we're going to need to pull that thread, because you will be amazed. You won't be amazed by where it leads. You'll be amazed, I believe, where it leads.
I'm looking forward to that.
Okay. Anything else you want to say before we wrap here?
No, I just think that, you know, the Men in Black are super cool, and everyone should try to meet them one day.
You are as soft as it gets. You really are. You are one of my favorite people in the world.
Soft and one of your favorite people in the world?
Yeah, that's why you're one of my
That's
favorite
a lot of
people in the world.
compliments.
So that's it for tonight. As I said, we're gonna have to pull that thread we talked about, and we're gonna do that on an episode before too long. We are the Greater Boston Paranormal Associates. You can visit us at www.thegBPA.com, www.uss-salem.org is the Salem's website. We're on Facebook at Greater Boston Paranormal Associates, at USS Salem Paranormal Experience, and where else are we, Cookie? We're on YouTube.
We're on YouTube.
Greater Boston Paranormal Associates, not the Greater Boston Paranormal Associates, just Greater Boston Paranormal Associates. And Greater Boston Paranormal TV is where you can find, at some point, this episode, and where you can currently find all the previous episodes of our show. So thank you very much for joining us. It's been a pleasure for the most part.
Thank you so much for tuning in. We really appreciate it. And what do we got next?
I'd rather not say.
It's a secret.
Either I'd rather not say, or I haven't the slightest idea, one or the other. I will tell you that we've got a couple of big trips coming up. We're going to be at the infamous Conjuring House on Thursday night. Mm-hmm. And we have a lot of stuff from the Conjuring House, so there'll be an episode coming out of that. We're taking a road trip in April, where we're going to go to the Hinsdale House in Hinsdale, New York. We're going to go to Franklin Castle in Cleveland, Ohio. And we also, by hook or by crook, are going to wrap up our episode on our big Midwest road trip last summer to the Sally House in Atchison, Kansas, and the Villisca Axe Murder House in Villisca, Iowa. Yep. We just have so much stuff from those episodes that we've kind of struggled condensing it into an episode, but we'll get that done soon. So,
yep.
All good things to come.
For sure.
So stick with us. Thank you, all the cable companies, for sticking with us. We really appreciate it. And keep tuning in. Take care. Thank you very much.